Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show of Sean Unboxing. So, this weekend, we have that huge card coming from New York City, from the place that tennis built. What is it? Not the Joe Louis, why do I keep saying it wrong? Singer, Louis Armstrong, there you go, the Louis Armstrong Stadium. I think it's excellent. It's nice to obviously be changing sporting events to different locations. I also like the idea about next year doing an event in the White House with Dana White. That'll be excellent as well. Um, but this is a really good card. Some really good fights. Obviously, let's talk about the main event because that's what most people think should be the main event. And arguably, I can understand why they say that. When you think about everyone on the card, obviously Shakur Stevenson is the most decorated. Silver medal winning Olympian, three-weight world champion, was a unified champion at 130 pounds. So obviously he's the most decorated. But as far as him doing that much more than anyone else in the card, well, that's an exaggeration. His resume is still up and coming. He still doesn't have a lot of big names and really significant fights under his resume. That's why people were excited about the Zepeda fight. Zepeda might not be a world champion, a former world champion, or a current world champion, but what he is one of the top fighters in the 135-pound division with a very solid resume. A guy who literally earned his world title fight. A guy that at one time was ranked the number one contender by all four sanctioning bodies. So for him, it was just a matter of really picking and choosing what direction he wanted to go in. I don't understand why he didn't go for the WBO against the Ukrainian guy. That would have seemed the no-brainer. He could have went that route, ended up getting the WBO title, and now been fighting Shakur Stevenson for unification. Or potentially he could have already fought Keyshawn Davis, right? So a lot of big fights potentially could have already fell into his lap, but his team chose to go in a different direction. And I think we have to really congratulate him and give him praise because all along it looked like the guy they were chasing was Shakur Stevenson. They've been specifically targeting left-hand fighters, southpaws, so they could prepare as much as possible before stepping in the ring with Shakur. I don't know if that's going to benefit them. I don't know how much that's going to help, but you can definitely understand and appreciate the warm-up, the work they put in to prepare for one of the most difficult southpaw fighters in boxing today. I think his last 6 fights have been against southpaws, if I'm not mistaken. Let me know in the comment section below. But obviously, he's going to be far more familiar now fighting a southpaw than he would have been a while ago. So he's put in his work. The question is, you got to ask yourself, do you think that's going to mean anything? Do you think that's going to make a difference? Historically, what people liked about Zepeda is that he was a volume puncher. And we know slick fighters, counter punchers, specifically like Shakur, they struggle with volume punchers. You can avoid some shots, but if a guy's throwing 6, 8 punch combinations, you can't avoid everything. So eventually, you're going to get caught with punches, you're going to get hit, and the question is, how is Shakur going to deal with that? One of the real questions people had about Shakur coming up was his chin, right? How good is his chin? You never know how good someone's chin is until they get chin checked. And at this point, he's looked a little hesitant. He looks like he doesn't really like getting hit. Nobody likes to get hit, but obviously some people embrace it more than others. For Shakur, at some points it seems as if he was a little, not afraid to get hit, but obviously, a little skittish, I guess would be the right way to put it. And against a guy like Zepeda, a volume puncher, that potentially could be a flaw. Potentially, right? It might not be, because, there's levels to the sport. And you could be a volume puncher, but if you're just not at that level, then it doesn't matter. You're going to struggle. You're going to be taken apart piece by piece. And that's what people want to see. They want to see if Shakur Stevenson can do that. Take Zepeda apart piece by piece. The other thing we got to worry about Shakur is his hands. he's got a bit of that Floyd Mayweather brittle hand syndrome, a bit like Jeff Fennick, one of my favorite fighters back in the day. Could have been a really great fighter, but brittle hands really ruined his career. For Shakur, it's a similar situation. That's why I said he primarily should be facing fighters only in Vegas. He should be getting those shots that Floyd Mayweather got. I don't understand why he continues to fight New Jersey, New York area where you can't get those shots. It seems to be counterproductive, right? Knowing that Floyd did that his whole career and that it really helped extend Floyd's career, you would figure that Shakur would do something similar. And maybe he will, because it's a real possibility that he might hurt his hand in this fight. And if he does hurt his hands, that could potentially change the whole makeup of the fight as well, right? And really change things a lot. So there's a lot of interesting things that potentially could happen. One of those things is that Shakur could go in there and just be way too good and win a very easy, uninteresting fight. People don't really want that, because the other issue with Shakur, he's been in some boring fights. So people hope to see him do something sensational, to really make a statement, kind of like Norman did when he went to Japan, kind of like Floyd Schofield just did against, obviously, Tevin Farmer, right? People are hoping that Shakur can possibly do something equally as exciting, because obviously that will get him a ton of praise and a ton of good publicity moving forward. So, knock on wood, you can hope for the best, but the thing with boxing and sports in general, you never know what's going to happen. Anything is possible. So those are some of the things that make that fight interesting. As far as Berlanga and Shiraz, obviously you have two young fighters. Shiraz definitely looks to be the guy with more upside. At one point, people really were hyped about him. Such a long, tall fighter, good power, good boxing ability, right? He really looked like he was potentially going to be that next generational great fighter out of the UK. But obviously he stepped up, took on a world champion, and was exposed in that fight. Looked a little chinny, didn't look that durable. His power never really came into play. But we always knew that. When I was talking about that fight and breaking it down, my question that I brought up then was, how is Shiraz going to be on weigh day, right? Is he draining himself too much? Is he taking away a lot of his potential stamina and strength, right? The potential toughness that you need to be a great fighter by draining yourself down to 160 pounds. Now we're getting him at his first fight at 168 pounds. Maybe we'll get a whole different version. Stronger, a chin that looks sturdier, the power will once again show itself, and we'll see the guy that we thought was potentially going to be a superstar. But maybe not. Maybe all those things that were exposed are real vulnerabilities that Berlanga could expose, because Berlanga may not be the skilled fighter that the WBC middleweight champion was, but what he is a far bigger fighter, physically bigger. Obviously, a guy that puts on a lot of weight. He's going to come in the ring huge, right? And obviously, he's a hard puncher as well. So these are all things that potentially could really put Shiraz in for a bad day. I think potentially what this fight's going to look like, kind of probably like Justice Hooney versus the UK fighter that's just knocked him out recently. Why can't I remember his name? I predicted the UK guy was going to get the knockout, but I also said that Justice Hooney was probably going to win rounds and look pretty skilled early on in that fight, but would eventually get caught. And I feel against Berlanga and Shiraz, it's kind of a similar situation. Eventually, Shiraz is going to get caught, and the question is, what's his chin like? What's his toughness going to be at 168 pounds? Can he really bear down, absorb, and take it, and then continue to put it back out there? Because that's what real champions do. Real champions find a way to win. They come through hurdles, they come through issues, and they get the most out of themselves and get the win at the end, regardless of what it takes to do it. So it's a great fight, should be very entertaining. I would prefer to see Shiraz win because I think obviously he's got more upside. He also has the UK market, and obviously he's got Turkey Al Sheikh's backing behind him. Big money, right? Potentially a Canelo Alvarez fight is sitting right there waiting for him. So obviously that would be my preference. But if you watched the show yesterday, you know my prediction is Berlanga by knockout. So, I'm going away from my preference and going with the boxing prediction. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think? Do you think Berlanga's going to win? Do you think his power is going to be too much for Shiraz, or do you give it to Shiraz, the young UK fighter? Then, of course, we have Subriel Matias versus Alberto Puello. Puello coming off of a very good victory, beating Gary Russell, who then went on to have probably a career-defining victory against the Australian fighter, right? Looked unbelievable in that fight. Sorry, not against Australia, against who? Who did he fight? Oh, Valenzuela, who beat Cruz, right? I could not believe the volume, the engine that Gary Russell displayed against Valenzuela. I definitely think he was on the juice hard in that fight, because you cannot go from a fight with Puello where your gas tank ran out, your volume was so low, to a fight with Valenzuela where you never got tired for 12 rounds. Like, it was unbelievable, an unbelievable performance. And we're going to see him get back in the ring soon, so we will see if he can duplicate that performance. For Puello, he was able to go in there and really make Russell look not even close to what we saw against Valenzuela. Whether that's PEDs or whether Puello was just that much better and exposed Russell. If that's the case, then we could expect him to go in there and do the exact same thing against Matias, who obviously is not the skilled fighter that Gary Russell is. He's probably a harder puncher, but even that is questionable because Russell was also quite a banger as well. I think one of the differences that might show up and show out in this fight is obviously the different sanctioning body they're fighting under. Subriel Matias was before an IBF champion and an IBF contender, meaning that he had to make next day weigh-ins to qualify for that IBF title. Fighting for the WBC title against Puello now, he does not need to worry about that. So he can put on as much weight as he needs to put on after the weigh-in. Throw on 20, 30 pounds and come in huge and ready to go. And I think potentially that might make him far better than we've seen in most recent fights, where his gas tank looked pretty limited. He wasn't the volume puncher that he had been prior to that, and he kind of got exposed in his last few fights. But I think a lot of that probably was because he was drained because of the IBF. So that's definitely a real thing to pay attention to, and something that I'm really excited to see how it unfolds. Then, of course, we have one of my favorite fighters, Ryota Tatsumi, who recently, in preparation for this fight card, has been training in the same gym with Bam Rodriguez, which I think is fantastic. For a young Japanese fighter like Ryota Tatsumi to be doing the exact same thing that Junto Nakatani did, which is actually be in America, sparring and training against American fighters, I think that's a great leg up for a young Japanese fighter to really get a lot more real experience. Something that obviously a lot of Japanese fighters don't get when they isolate themselves in Japan. That was obviously one criticism people had towards Inui. But obviously Inui is a different case. He has enough money where he can fly in American sparring partners, so that's not an issue. He does what Manny Pacquiao did, right? You fly in your sparring partners, it's not a big deal, and then you get them anyway. For Junto, obviously we know he spent a lot of time in America with his trainer, sparring, and living, which if you want to be a crossover star, that definitely helps. You learn the culture, you learn the language, and it gives you definitely a leg up when you start doing big interviews and getting out there. For Ryota Tatsumi, it's a similar situation. Already in doing little things, he's already using his English a little bit. Obviously he's building on that, being in the States, he's putting himself in a position for ESL learning, which is going to be a great opportunity for him to improve his English as well. And it's just great to see different fighters, especially pound for pound elite fighters like Bam in training, just to see what they do on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully you can learn from that. Obviously, his brother is a top 130 pound fighter right now, really probably one fight away from getting his own world title fight. But that being said, I mean, it's still a great experience to be traveling all over the US, getting all that different experience in different gyms against different sparring partners, right? We've seen Chris Eubank and many fighters outside the US do that in their careers, and obviously it's a smart thing to do. It's like getting your master's degree, right? You're putting in that extra education, and so it's definitely not a bad thing. And we'll see how he looks on this fight card, now that he's been, outside of Japan and primarily sparring and training in the US. And obviously that's going to make this transition to a US fight card that much easier, because he doesn't need to worry about time and fatigue and jet lag and any of those kind of things. Also the diet, obviously he's living here, so his body's going to be far more used to the American diet and everything else. So I do expect to see a better version of Ryota Tatsumi in his second fight, but it is still just a second fight. He's still a young kid, so I do expect him to be fast-tracked by Ring Magazine and Turki Al Sheikh, but it's going to be a fun ride. But let me know what you think about this upcoming card. I mean, it's a great card overall. Should be some exciting fights. And obviously we got the all-woman super card the night before. Even if you're not a big fan of women's boxing, this is a historical card. It's the biggest all-female card in boxing history. So that's pretty excellent. Hats off to Jake Paul for putting that on, and on Netflix as well. So hooray, hooray, good work. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Tell me your predictions in the comment section. Thanks for watching.